Hello, everyone. This is a webinar which will describe Attachment B, CITE and ACORNS 2018-2019 Outcomes and Evaluation. This is the third and final piece of an application for both the CITE and the ACORNS program. I'll go over the ACORNS Outcome and Evaluation template first, and then I'll go over to the CITE one. Again, there's a lot of similarities between the two, just a couple of minor differences. So this is Attachment B, 2019 Outcomes and Evaluation. You'll begin by entering your tribal organization here at the top. There are two sections to this attachment. Please complete section 1 and 2 of this form. This is the instructions page, which has instructions as to what you should put into each one of these. I will make sure you're reading those and feel familiar with those, and then I'll go through the template to make sure that there's an additional explanation on what we're looking for. So what you'll be entering are objectives, evaluation questions, indicators, data sources and tools, and we'll go from there. So this is an example. The first section is section 1 example. There's a table with objectives, evaluation questions, indicators, and data sources or tools. So the purpose of this worksheet is to help your organization or the applicant determine what are your key evaluation questions for your project. So in your work plan, you identified short-term outcomes and measures, which helped you know if you were staying on track with your activities. The evaluation questions are overarching questions that you want to have answered by the end of your project, which help you understand how well you did, what was the impact, and what difference did it make. You can answer or ask any question that you want. It is really up to what your organization or what your project is interested in knowing. So your evaluation is really determined by you. So in this example, we use the objective of by the end of the project year, a traditional cookbook will be developed by and distributed to the community to improve healthy eating. So there's two types of evaluation questions that you can ask. There is an impact evaluation question, and there is process evaluation question. Impact evaluation questions, they refer to the actual impact of your objective on the community. So if my objective is to improve healthy eating, my impact question might be, did the creating and distributing of the cookbook improve healthy eating? Did it actually accomplish? Did it have the impact that we wanted it to have? A process evaluation question is more focused on the process that you took to complete your objective. So maybe you're interested, maybe you have a new grants team or a new project team, and you're really interested in knowing how well did you manage that project, or how well did you do the things that you said you were going to do. So in this example, it said, how well did we complete this objective? So like in our work plan, we set activities and timelines and outcomes and measures, and we might want to know how well did we stay on track with our timeline, or did we distribute it the way that we wanted to? You know, how well did we complete that? So we'll go through this example, and then we'll look at the actual template that you'll be filling out for section 1. So this is the objective example. Here are some example evaluation questions. You can do just one evaluation per objective, or you can do multiple evaluation questions per objective. So once we know what our evaluation questions are, or what we want to know about our project at the end, we need to determine indicators. An indicator is like a data source, or not a data source, but it's what will help us answer that question. So what information, if my question is, did the creation and distribution of the cookbook improve healthy eating, what would help me answer that question? So a couple of examples of indicators I came up with are the percent of recipes in the cookbook that were healthy. So, maybe you wanted to have some desserts or some other, sweet treats within your cookbook, as we do. So then what percentage of the recipes in the cookbook were healthy? Because if we're distributing this cookbook to try to improve healthy eating, but 90% of those recipes in the cookbook are sweet treats, then that probably won't increase the health of our community. So we want to know what percentage of those recipes were healthy. The next indicator, but that's not the only thing that we need to answer that question. So you'll probably need a couple of different indicators in order to get a complete answer for your question. So the next indicator could be the number of people who used or tried a new healthy recipe from the book. So maybe you distributed the cookbook, but nobody used it. So if you distributed the cookbook and the whole goal is to try to improve healthy eating, if nobody tried any of the recipes in the cookbook, then we can't really say it improved healthy eating because we don't know if anybody used the cookbook. So maybe an indicator would be the number of people that used or tried a new recipe, healthy recipe from that cookbook. And not one of just the sweet treat ones, but one of the healthy ones. And maybe that means in your planning, you want to mark, have a little logo or an image on each of the recipes that you consider healthy recipes. And then that way the people that you're giving the cookbook to would also know which one of those recipes are healthy ones. So another way to try to answer this question of did it improve healthy eating in our community was the number of people who said they would cook a healthy recipe again. So maybe they cooked that healthy recipe and they thought it was really gross. So maybe another good indicator on if it's going to actually improve healthy eating was people who said they would use that healthy recipe again or that they liked it, because that shows that it's going to be a change that they'll make and that maybe that would actually improve their healthy eating or improve their eating habits. A final indicator that I came up with for this example was the number of people who reported eating more vegetables after getting the recipe book or the cookbook. So maybe you asked people before, you had some pre-test data or pre-project data that people reported on how many fruits and vegetables they were eating. And then after the cookbook was distributed, you could ask that same question again, and it was the number of people who reported eating more vegetables after that. And so you're able to see if there was actually some sort of improved nutrition or healthy eating practices. So that is for the impact. So once we kind of have the things that we think would answer our question, then you go across and you figure out, where am I going to get that information? Where am I going to get the information to answer that question? So for each indicator, you should have a data source or tool. And those data sources, you might be getting them from multiple places or from all of the same place. So for this first one, percent of recipes in the cookbook that were healthy, you can get that from the data source. You could get that from your completed traditional cookbook, right? So you would just be able to take the cookbook you created and, know the number of total recipes that are in there, and then, get what percentage of healthy recipes out of that total there are. And that would be your data source for that indicator. The next one would be number of people who tried a new healthy recipe from the book. So maybe you want to get a community traditional cookbook feedback survey. So after you've distributed the cookbooks, you want to get some feedback from the community on how they liked it, if they were using it, what they thought, and kind of their impressions on it. So you would maybe want to develop a survey. And because you know that these are some of your indicators to answer your evaluation questions, you would just want to make sure that when you're designing that survey or planning that survey, that you include questions that will answer these. So maybe one of the questions on there would be, have you used a healthy recipe from the cookbook? And then from your feedback survey, you would be able to count up the number of people who tried a healthy recipe. Same for those who said they would use it again. So one of your questions on this survey that you develop would be, would you use one of these recipes again? And they can indicate that. So then you would be able to collect answers to these questions, and then that would help you answer your evaluation question. Because you would hate to put in all this effort into making this traditional cookbook, which people might really appreciate, but if our overall goal is to improve community wellness by improving, and reducing chronic disease, you want to make sure that your efforts are actually helping you accomplish that goal. So you might have a cookbook, but if nobody's using it or if it's not improving the nutrition, then you want to understand why and how you can change things so that you can actually make an impact on your community's health and well-being. And that's why evaluation questions and evaluation is really important. So the other type of evaluation question, like we mentioned, was a process evaluation. So what was our process like? How well did we complete this, this objective? So again, I came up with some sample indicators, and I'm using my objective to help me develop what indicators I want. And again, that's why making a SMART specific objective is so important, because you really use that to guide so many things in your project. So for example, we wrote that we wanted to make a traditional cookbook. So how well did we complete that? How well did we make that cookbook traditional? So maybe one indicator is the % of recipes that use traditional foods. So if we're making a traditional cookbook, but we only have one recipe that's using traditional foods, it's hard to call that a traditional cookbook. That might just be a cookbook. So you want to make sure that so that might be a way to determine how well you completed that objective. So the % of recipes that were used that were traditional. The next one is you want to improve healthy eating, right? So again, you say the number of recipes that were healthy. And again, you can kind of double dip. We have that same indicator for that top question, but that also helps us answer the how well did we complete the objective, because we're trying to improve nutrition. So we want to make sure that our recipes are healthy in our cookbook. The second one, or the next one, is the number of different people who contributed recipes. So in our objective, we wrote that we want a traditional cookbook that will be developed by and distributed to the community. So we want this to be a community cookbook. We want the community to be involved, to have participation, to share their recipes, and be able to share that with the rest of the community. So maybe one way to know whether or not we got a lot of input or buy-in was the number of different people who contributed recipes. If there's only 2 people, contributing recipes to the community cookbook, it's not so much of a community cookbook, it's more of a cookbook by those 2 folks. And again, that's why, using those detailed objectives is really important to help you understand if you're accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. So other indicators are adherence to the objective timeline. So you would use your work plan and decide if you followed your timeline that you outlined, the number of cookbooks created, the number of cookbooks distributed, because we said we wanted to create them and distribute them. And then feedback from the community project staff on the cookbook. So maybe you want to ask the project staff who were working on this cookbook, how well did that go? If you were to go back and do this cookbook again, would we do anything different? Would we do anything the same? And really just kind of get feedback on how that process went, kind of a debrief. And all of these indicators will feed back to help you answer that question of how well did we complete this objective. Now, you don't have to have this many indicators, but I just wanted to give a nice long list of examples of, you can answer that question in different ways. And I would, again, use your leadership at your organization or the other people that will be working on this project with you, get their ideas for ways that they would like to evaluate the program and how they'd like to answer those questions, what indicators they want to use. Again, we'll use the cookbook to get the answers to a lot of these. Maybe you have people's names written in there. You use your work plan to figure out how well you stuck to your timeline. You'll use the number of cookbooks created. You can use the purchase order for book printing, the number of cookbooks distributed. You create a distribution tracking sheet so you know how many went out and to who. And then, feedback from the community and the project staff on the cookbook. You could include that as a question on your Community Traditional Cookbook Feedback Survey, which you would also use to answer this other question. So that's just one example of how you would take an objective from your work plan, figure out what you want to know about that at the end of the project year. Indicators would determine, you know, how to answer that question, and then your data sources are where you're going to get that information for your indicators. So then as you go down to this section 1, this is where you would take the objectives from your work plan. So you don't need to develop new objectives. You would be copying the objectives that you listed in your work plan and list however many you have here. And then if 1 to 2 evaluation questions for each objective, the indicators needed to answer those evaluation questions, and the data sources for each of those indicators. So again, you don't need to use this whole table, or maybe you need to use more than this table. This is just what gives you a place to start. If you have individual questions about this, you're more than welcome to request training and technical assistance, and we can help you develop some of these questions and identify indicators and data sources. So that is section 1. Section 2 is, this has a list of outcomes, and then these are outcomes that we will be reporting back to CDC on. So there's a whole list of outcomes that are potential. So you'll need to read through each of those outcomes, and then based off of your work plan and what you're going to be working towards, see if there's any of the activities or objectives from your work plan that will meet that outcome. So for example, one of these outcomes listed is increased availability and access to healthy, traditional, and other foods and beverages such as fruits, vegetables, and water. So maybe one of your objectives is to create a community garden. So if a community garden is established, that will increase access to healthy, traditional, and other foods and beverages. So you would select that by just marking X in the selected box. You would use your work plan probably to determine what's your estimated reach. So how many people do you think would have increased access to those foods through your community garden? And then who would be the key partners as a part of that? Now, you definitely do not need to select all of these. So you need to read through all of them, but the only ones you will select are the ones that your project would directly relate to. And then you would select how many people you think would be reached by that, by your project objective and meet with that outcome. And then who are the key partners on that. So you might have one of these selected, you might have multiple of these selected, but please only select the ones that your project, this project year, is directly working towards. If you have other grants that you're working on within your organization that address some of these issues, please do not select them. This is only based off of what you have indicated in your ACORNS or your CITE work plans. And this is to help us with our evaluation. So that's how you complete and fill out section 2 of this attachment. So that goes through this data source. Again, read these instructions. I'm going to switch over to the CITE one. There's just a couple of differences on the CITE one, and then we can share those. So this is the CITE Attachment B, Outcomes and Evaluation. It has the CITE logo on the top. The only difference between the ACORNS and the CITE one is that in the CITE application, you can only select certain strategies. So there's 4 strategies that you can select from your work plan, and we went over that in the work plan piece. So depending on which one of those 4 or what couple of those 4 you selected, you will write the objective associated with that strategy. So for example, if I decided to do a media campaign for my CITE work plan or my project proposal, I would select this as my selected strategy, and then I would insert the objective that in my work plan associated with that strategy. And then just like in the ACORNS one, you would select evaluation questions, indicators, and data sources. If I only selected strategy 1, you only need to fill out this section for strategy 1. If you selected more than one strategy, you would select each of the strategies that you will be working on in your work plan and then fill in the objective that supports that strategy and the evaluation questions associated with it. You should at least select one. You need to select at least one strategy. You should have at least indicated one strategy on your work plan, and then, but you could potentially select all of them. But just because all 4 strategies are listed here, you do not need to fill them out unless they are ones you are working on in your work plan. And then again, the section, so that's section 1, very similar to the ACORNS. Section 2 is the same, so there's going to be, the outcomes are a little bit more related to tobacco, so you will read the outcomes and then you will determine if your proposed project objectives and activities will be working towards that. If so, you select it, you determine the estimated reach and what are your key partners. Again, you do not need to select all of these. You only are selecting the ones to which your current proposed work plan activities and objectives for this application period will be working on. So that concludes this. This is the final, the third piece of the CITE or ACORNS application that you would submit to have a complete application.